Hey there, everybody. Thank you guys so much for stopping by my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Lailani, and tonight I am so excited. One of my favorite people is coming on tonight. Super honored for her to be on because her new book is out and it is phenomenal. Like when I say it's phenomenal, I mean what I say and I say what I mean, which means you need to go get it. And it is Baba Yaga's Book of Witchcraft, Slavic Magic from the Witch of the Woods by, you guessed it, Madame Pamita. So tonight we're going to be talking to her about this book. We're going to be talking to her about, of course, Baba Yaga, because I know you guys were all about that life. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Slavic magic and witchcraft and how it kind of relates to sort of these universal concepts that we're seeing across culture. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we bring her on, let's get to know a little bit about Madame Pamita. She's a teacher, she's an author, a spellcaster, and the proprietress of Madame Pamita's Parlour of Wonders. It's an amazing website with a lot of information. She teaches a lot of awesome classes, whether through this podcast, workshops, books, or articles. Her goal is to empower you and to provide a helping hand to assist you in finding the path to your success. She can do one-on-one coaching or weekly free live Q&As. She dispenses spell work and root work advice, teaching you ways to work with your spirits of plants, minerals, witchcraft tools, and other artifacts to assist you in achieving your goals. She is the author of course, this one, Baba Yaga's Book of Witchcraft, but she's also the author of Madame Pamita's Magical Tarot from Wiser, the Book of Candle Magic by Llewellyn, and the 7 Secrets to Supercharge Your Spell Work by the Parlour of Wonders. She's also a member of the Crystal Silence League and an ordained minister of the Universal Life Church and your tango expert. So without further ado, let's bring her on.
Oh my gosh,
Hey there.
what a great introduction. Thank you so much. It's so exciting I've been really looking forward to joining you and having this conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
Madame Pamita, I like when I say I'm a huge fan, like I'm such a huge fan. I remember doing one of my earlier YouTube videos about your tarot book, and you had posted it like on your website, and I was like, oh my god, she posted my video, and like I was just like the most excited little like fangirl ever. You have a bunch of people here in the live who are so excited that you are on tonight. And I just want to say hello to a few that did show up. We have Omira here. We have Marius. Hello. Mystical Misty Candles. Hello. Merrick, Tina, and the Jin. So we are going to have a lot more coming through and people watching this on replay. So I definitely want to get all this juicy stuff out. I gotta give you your props. This is amazing. This book is amazing. And I'm gonna tell you, I think the two things that really made me feel like this was a game changer in the way you wrote. It's the one was the format. I love this format. You wrote it from the perspective of like you have a section where it's almost as if you're writing from the voice of Baba Yaga herself. You write from your perspective, and then you give the cultural perspective, and then you give all like the little workings that you could do, and the pieces of how to's, plus the little story, a little like a little mythos in the very beginning. And I just feel like that was such a beautiful layout. I feel for someone who's neurotypical like myself, it made sense. It broke it up just enough for me to stay engaged and not lose focus on any one particular section. So that was kudos beautiful. And
Thank
the
you.
second piece of this that I feel is just where it's at is the fact that not being a Slavic person or a Ukrainian person, um, how much in common and how connected I felt to this book and to the things that you were teaching in here. Like as I was flipping through the pages, I was like, dude, I do this in my culture, and oh my god, we feel the same way about hair in our culture too. And like it was just, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it all. So that's my 2 cents on your book. What made you write this book in the first place? Like what brought you to this point?
Oh my gosh, that is a that can be a whole episode in itself. But really, okay, so in understanding my personal practice as it has evolved, I think our spiritual practices, our lives, our sexuality, our all kinds of aspects of our lives are in constant evolution. Our knowledge, our interests, everything we do. I don't know many people. I mean, there are people, I suppose, who like find one thing and stay with that one thing and don't evolve or change. But I think the majority of us have an evolution. That's growth, that's life, that's creativity. And so in my own spiritual practice, it has really evolved in a way that I'm an animist, which means that I see the life force and spirit in all things, plants, animals, the wind, fire, elements, anything. You see it as alive and something that you can interact with on a spiritual level and certainly on the material level as well, but with a respect that is sort of become the hallmark of my practice, right? So that you don't come to fire and demand fire, you do what I want to do, but you work along with fire,
Yep.
right? Work along with the spirit of fire to invite it in, to honor it, and to work with it, not demand that it's your servant and you do for me what I want you to do. So as an animist, that's one aspect of my hallmark of my practice. The other is that I'm a spiritualist. And I know in Puerto Rico, there's a big spiritualist, legacy of spiritualism. Also in the stateside, there's a big legacy of working with spirits. But really, it goes back to the most ancient times. It's not something that just came about in the 1800s. The form of it might have come around in the 1800s. But if we go back to the oldest times, people worked with spirits before there were even gods and goddesses, right? And they were animists before they were worshiping gods and goddesses. So as I get back to that very, very most ancient love of the most ancient practices, I was a spiritualist. So as a spiritualist, I'm not a ceremonial magician. I'm not calling in a spirit and demanding you do this thing for me, or, ordering spirits around. Quite the opposite. The spirits come to me and they say, hey girl, we need you to do something. And I'm like, okay. So sometimes I get a little chill when I said that. Sometimes there's spirits that I have no ancestral connection to, and they're asking me to do a thing for them, but without any obligation for me to, not necessarily having a relationship with them. But in the case of Baba Yaga, she had been in my life all my life long. We had told stories about Baba Yaga. I thought everybody knew about her. I thought this was some spirit that everybody knew about. But she really came to the forefront when I went into my cronehood, which is going postmenopausal. When you go through menopause, you're entering your crone age. And as you enter into that elder place, you have different, it's almost like something shifts for you, and really shifts for you in a good way, like empowers you. You're a wise person, right? At that point, and you're much, there's something that happens. So she came forward to me and said, okay, now is our time that we're really going to work closely together. And the evidence of this spirit contact, the absolute irrefutable evidence is that you may or may not know that a book takes 2 to 3 years to produce. Like this book was started at the beginning of actually in 2019 is when I started formulating this book. So the fact that it took 3 years to get here, and it comes out right at the time when Ukraine is in the news, to the month that the Ukraine is in the news, tells me that spirit speaking through me and working through me, right? So that I'm connecting to the spirit and doing what the spirit says, so that this book comes out on time, because she understands in that broad perspective that there's going to be a need for information about Ukrainian magic and about Slavic practices. I could not have foreseen that. I didn't foresee that. I don't see world events, even though I'm a reader. I don't see world events. I can help individual people, but I'm not that person. So the spirit coming through me is like, you need to do this book now, girl. Get on it, get on it, get on it. And so as I was called to do that, that's really what sparked it. I had always been looking for information about my ancestral practices, but really coming up empty-handed for a long time, because there isn't much out there in English, very little out there in English. And then my wonderful, beautiful Ukrainian Canadian friend, Katie Karpets, who runs a store called thewitchery.ca, she had a book called The Word in the Wax, which is about an ancestral healing practice that probably relates to something in Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? We find there's so much that relates, but it's a practice of doing a cleansing, a spiritual cleansing to remove fear. What we in Ukrainian call strach, but in Spanish would be susto, right?
Yes.
So that idea that fear is and what they call fear, I would say we would call in modern days trauma.
Trauma.
You're working to remove trauma. So trauma is something that repeats and creates havoc in your life if you keep reliving that trauma, even if you're not living it in the moment. So that fear, the strach or the trauma, is being removed spiritually. So when I found that book, which was a practice that my grandmother did, I said, oh, this was like opening the Cave of Wonders in the Aladdin story. You could walk in and go, oh my gosh, that means that if I can find this, I can find the other stuff. I can find these other practices. So that's what started me on that path, really, was that book showing up at the right time so that I would get inspired to write my book and really explore, and felt that I could do this monumental task that was set out before me, which was to find information that only existed in like doctoral dissertations or articles in Ukrainian, like that were written 150 years ago, and all kinds of craziness. So it was a very, very hard task to write this book, but it was because Baba Yaga was knocking at my door and saying, you got to do this now, girl. This is the time.
It's interesting.
It's world time, you know?
Yeah. And it's interesting because that's exactly how spirits work. It's a calling. It's a calling. You know, you really, seeking them out is one thing. It's another thing when you're being called for a divine purpose to do the work of the spirits. Whole different ball game. And they won't let up, and you can't stop. There's no saying no to a spirit once you've been chosen to do the thing. You know what I mean?
I'm getting chills as you say that. Absolutely.
Yes, and you did the thing. I mean, you're right. It coming out in the divine timing that it did, you know, being told this information needs to be put out there because God only knows what could happen, and this could be lost, and it needs to be out. And not only that, but people who are not of Ukrainian culture can then find inspiration in those things. And also people, once again, finding compassion in humanity of other people. Let's be real. War is a blinding situation in which you lose the sight of humanity of people. But when you have a book that says we love, you know, our hair, and we decorate our eggs, and we sew our clothes, and everything is spiritual, and everything, and it brings it back to these are people. These are people. I think you're doing God's work. You're doing the spirit's work, and I am so happy you did, because like I said earlier, I relate to a lot of things in here, but I have to ask, because a lot of people need me to ask, who is Baba Yaga? And like you said, you know, she called to you and she wanted you to do this thing. Does she do that to other people, especially people outside of Ukrainian culture?
Well, I think the spirits call who they're going to call. And I think that there's something very special that if it is of your culture, you might feel a closer kinship to it, or it might feel more, cozy, or you might have more recollections or memories of it. But it doesn't mean, like I've had for myself, for example, I have had spirit of Black Hawk. I have no Native American. I am 100% European. I have no Native American ancestry, but spirit of Black Hawk is like, you need to make this candle to represent the hoodoo concept of the spirit of Black Hawk. In African American spiritualist traditions, Black Hawk was super huge. I have no ancestral connection to any of that. But if the spirit of Black Hawk comes to me and say, make a candle, and then I make the candle, and then 2 months later, we have the Keystone Pipeline and all of that stuff that was going on where people were protesting, and we have Black Lives Matter where people are dealing with systemic injustice in a very big way and may need to have a candle to do their magical work. who am I to say no to that spirit? I don't ever ask Black Hawk for anything, but if he asks me to do something, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it for you. And so it's not necessarily that I'm going to now be a devotee or claim Black Hawk as mine. Never would I do that. He's not mine. But if he asks me to do something, I think spirits come through the channel that they can come through. And if you are an open person, open to spiritual work, and you're a spiritualist, they're going to come through you. It doesn't mean I have any special claim on Black Hawk. It doesn't mean I have a special claim on Santa Muerte or any other spirit that belongs to a different culture. But if they ask me to do something, I'm going to do it with humility, with respect, and have it there so that someone who does have that deep, deep connection can utilize this tool, for example, of the
See,
candle.
that's the art of the spiritist. That's exactly the art of the spiritist, because we are, like you said, we're channels. We are the vessels. We are the manifestors of spirit's needs and desires for humanity. So yes, I think especially the youth, I'm seeing a lot of, oh, this spirit came to me in a dream, so now they're mine, or now I'm the child of this spirit, or now I have to start worshiping them and creating altars to them. And the reality is, no, maybe for that moment, that message was just for you, to give you a little something, or maybe they needed you to do something for a greater purpose, and then that's it. People forget that these spirits come and go, and our role as spiritists, like you said, is be a channel, be humble, and play your role in a way that is of service. And
Yeah,
you'll be blessed. You will be blessed. And
100%.
Baba Yaga has been reaching out to a lot of people, especially now with this Ukraine situation. I'm noticing an uptick in a lot of people saying, you know what, I'm getting dreams about a swamp witch with chicken legs, houses, and I'm getting this and that. And what's up with that? Let's talk about it. Who is she?
So she comes to us. Now there's a misconception. I mean, as there are a lot of misconceptions, there's a misconception that she's a Russian spirit.
Okay.
And on some level, you can say, well, she is, if you do your research and you do your diligence, you find out that she is pan-Slavic, that she shows up really in stories of all the Slavic countries. The name Baba Yaga is Russian, but she shows up in other countries with other names. So she might be Yedzi Baba, or she might be Baba Roga, we see in Serbia, or she might, be, she has a bunch of different names. But because these were oral traditions, and Ukrainian people in particular, my grandparents were illiterate. They didn't read or write. They obviously spoke Polish and Ukrainian. They spoke, languages, but they didn't know how to read and write. So all information was passed. This is very typical of agrarian cultures, right? If you live in an agricultural community and you're in a family in pre-industrial times or in early industrial times, you didn't need to read and write. Why would you need to read and write? Not really quite necessary. And so you would maybe not go to school. You might go to school till third or fifth grade or something like that. And then you're working on the farm as soon as you were, old enough to work. And so
Right.
the traditions were passed on orally. We find this in a lot of, we find this in every place all over the world, right? The traditions are passed on orally. And this was the case in a lot of Slavic countries. So in mid 1800, Alexander Afanasyev was a Russian guy, and he learned about what the Grimm brothers were doing. The Grimm brothers were in Germany, and they were going around collecting stories from these oral traditions and writing them down. So
Mm.
Afanasyev was the first person to write down these stories that she appears in, and she appears in dozens and dozens and dozens of stories, really recording these stories. Now we find references to her going back hundreds of years before that, but they were usually just mentioning her. They weren't recording the stories. So Afanasyev in Russia was the first one to write down the stories of his community, but they were not the only stories about her. And she was showing up far earlier than 1800s and showing up in all the countries, in Poland, Belarus, Croatia, Serbia, all of the countries, right? So as we look at that concept, she's old, and she goes back really to ancient prehistoric times that they can find documentation, early documentation of the forest mother or the forest grandmother, and that she had played the same role. So this was one name that was given to this forest grandmother. Now, this late date that these stories were recorded meant that there was Christian influence on some of these stories. So and there's actually even more of, I would say, like even some of these stories have a Russian influence in that she's like an ogre, she's evil, she's bad, which was then we took something that was beautiful but untamable, nature, and then nature became bad and dangerous only. Now, in earlier stories of Baba Yaga, the older stories, she might be ambiguous. She could go either way. Or she might be actually a donor that someone would go to, they would come to her, for example, and say, I need to pass through the forest safely, and make an offering. And then you could move through the forest safely. Or in the story, you would come to her and ask her a question, and she would direct you in the right place to go. So she was seen as the forest mother. And it wasn't really until post-Christianity that we start to see that she's an evil ogre. Those are the newer stories. Yeah. So it's through the stories that the old ways were kept alive in a time that Christianity would say, you can't worship your pagan beliefs, right? You can't do this. Okay, well, then now she's a fairy tale figure. So that was a way to turn this old ancient spirit into something that we could still keep her energy going. But it was just a fairy tale, right? Yeah. So she's a grandmother. She's a crone figure. She lives in the forest alone. She lives in a house that is a small, tiny, tiny hut, like a little one-room cabin on chicken legs that has giant chicken legs, or sometimes a spindle, sometimes 4 chicken legs, sometimes 1 chicken leg, most often 2 chicken legs. She's that ambiguous character who could go one way or another, but she represents the spirit of nature and the spirit of the forest. And the spirit of the forest could go one way or another for you when you go in there. So it's the later stories where she's sort of an ogre figure. Earlier stories, she could be ambiguous or even benevolent. So.
And does she have any association with swamps and water like that?
Well, I mean, she has association with water. There's sometimes we see her put in a swamp. Sometimes, she could be in a swamp, but mostly she's in the forest, and, that's really where we see her. I think the association with the swamps is a kind of probably a mix up with the Vodyanik. The Vodyanik is the deep water spirit. He's a guy, and he sometimes lives in swamps, and he's also seen as kind of an ogre. So sometimes those two, I think, can get, mixed up. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to her interactions with people, because like you said in our pre-interview, the spirits tend to kind of come and go, at least in olden times, tend to come and go and have interactions with people on a very intimate level in that sense. Her interactions with people, are they normally friendly? Are they loving like a grandmother? Or are you noticing that she's more mysterious? Because I know in your book it talked a lot about her hut being in the woods, far deep in the woods, for a very specific reason. And I know that in many folk tales and a couple of movies I've seen, it talks about the woods kind of shifting and moving, the trees shifting and moving, so that it's difficult to find her hut. But yet there's always a helper or someone in the woods that will then lead you to her if you're truly meant to meet with her. Now, I wanted to ask, is that part of her mystery, this sort of elusiveness and aloofness, if you will?
Well, understanding that one of her sort of archetypes is that she's the initiator. An initiation is for you to move up into a community, right? So in many spiritual practices, you have an initiation before you can become a full-fledged member of the group. In olden times, anything that you were meant to be initiated from childhood into adulthood, or from being just a kid to being a healer, or a kid to being a warrior, you had to go through some sort of initiation. And the initiation served 2 purposes. Number 1, it tested your commitment, right? I will say this, an initiation is not a certificate of participation, right?
Oh, say it. Oh, yes.
Baba Yaga doesn't give out certificates of participation. So when, as an initiator and in ancient Slavic culture, there would be elders, particularly elder women. And really, we know that there's a deep tradition of elder women initiating the warriors into the warrior class, not the elder warriors. The grandmas were initiating the warriors. The grandmas were also initiating the spirits, the people into being a healer or into being, whatever they were, whatever congregation that they were joining or community that they were going to join, right? So there's two parts to an initiation. One is it's got to be a test that tests you, the initiatee, commitment. The other part of it is for the initiator to see that you're ready to join, right? If you didn't do your homework, you're not ready to join. We're not giving out certificates of participation. You got to go back and learn some more and then come back and then you'll be initiated, right? So that being turned away sometimes is part of the initiation process, because if you're turned away and you aren't committed, you won't come back again, right? So that turning away, we see this in stories all the time. It shows up in Star Wars. It shows up in all these things where there's an initiation process. So understand that yeah, exactly. Understand that she represents an initiator. So initiator isn't going to be necessarily like the divine mother going, oh, you are my children, you all come to me. She's a little bit of a tester. I like to say that her personality, this is my like kind of elevator pitch for her personality, is like she's like the tough Olympics coach that says to you, Lailani, okay, you want to be a gold medal winner in gymnastics. You're going to come and train with me 15 hours a day, 7 days a week until the Olympics tryouts. And that will get you to gold medal. And you, Lailani, will go like, I'm not ready to do 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or you'll go, yes, I can do it. Or I'll try. Or now when you're in that 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, guess what? You're going to cry. You're going to be pissed at your coach. You're going to be mad at them. You're going to hate them. But when they get you to that gold medal, you're going to love them. Right. And the relationship with Baba Yaga is a lot like that. She's going to test you. She's an initiator, but she's not testing you to be a jerk. She's not stopping you. She's not doing it to punish you or because it amuses her. She's doing it like a coach does it because she sees in you what you don't even see in yourself.
Yeah, she's pulling out that gold medal winner.
Exactly. And she's going to push you farther than you think you can go because she knows that you can get. Listen, no Olympic coach is going to take me and say, let's go to the Olympics because they know I'm not Olympic material, right? That's it. My chance for that ship has sailed. So they're not going to take someone who's not ready, right? Same thing with Baba Yaga. She's not going to take you on unless she sees in you what you don't see in yourself, and she's going to push you so that you achieve it because she sees the vision of who you can be.
Yes.
So that's why this book, I'm so proud of this book because this book was so bloody hard. And during the creation of this book, I was crying. I was like ready to give up. I was like, and thank goodness I had worked with a publisher because they say you have a deadline. And I'm like, I have a deadline. Okay, I have to do it. Because otherwise I would have gone, forget it. I can't do this. This is too much. So she lined up she lined it up so that I could do and achieve this thing that I'm so very proud of. This is my gold medal right here. I'm so proud of this book, but it's only because she believed in me. So that's why I say, if you say, is she a cuddly grandma? No, she's a tough grandma, but she's a tough grandma who loves you and says, I'm going to push you because I know you can do it.
Love it.
So that's her in a nutshell.
And as I was reading too, it taught, I really connected with this idea of the forest, and you brought up her being like an initiator. And it's funny because in a lot of indigenous cultures and a lot of native cultures, many of our indigenous initiation practices involve taking the initiate and placing them into the forest or placing them into like an area in which they have to fend for themselves and figure it out with the elements around them. They're left with nothing. They're left with no tools, no way to figuring out how to come back, and they have to figure it out. And it's the elements, it's the spirits of the trees and the waters and the earth that are supposed to teach them how to survive and make it back home as a different, changed person. And so that I really related to in this book. And I want to know, you know, where these similarities came from. Like, you have an egg cleansing in this book. An egg cleansing in this book. And I said, wait a second. You know, I remember the fight on TikTok 6 months ago when people were like, that's a closed thing, you can't do that, or that's this, that, and people just, no, I have this in my culture. No, but it's from over here. And it's just so misinformed. And you know, even with the topic about the hair, there's so many pieces that I say, wow, we have that in our culture.
Well, my
How?
first thought,
What's up
yeah.
with that?
Well, my first thought when I saw the egg cleanse, I was like thinking, this is my thought, because to me, I always associated egg cleansing with Latin American culture, curanderismo,
Yeah.
and all of that, right? Limpias, that's what I associated with. Why I grew up in Los Angeles, right? I'm surrounded by Mexican culture here and Central American culture here. So this is like, that's how I knew egg cleansing. When I saw it over in Ukrainian practices, I'm like, first thought was like, did they steal that? Did they borrow that? And no, they didn't. And so it goes back, and I was like, whoa, this is that
Wow.
mind-blowing moment when you see something, a light over here, boop, and you see a light over here, boop, and you're like,
Like the
wait a
pyramids.
minute.
Like the pyramids, how they're like
Exactly.
all over the world, but they're
Ex-
oh,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So when you start to see these, so my passion is going back to the oldest folk magic practices. That's my super passion. I love finding out like how far back I can go. How far back can I find this? And when we find eggs being used in prehistoric times, we find eggs being used, there's not eggs like existent, but we find references to eggs in, you know, art and documentation and going back. We know that this is an ancient practice, right? And so I did my research. I went in with a skeptical eye going, let's see, which is appropriate, right? It's appropriate to go in and make sure that there's no, co-opting of something or stealing of something. And I went and I looked and I saw, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And the reason I found as I looked at this, we can go back, oh my gosh, to the cultures and where they originated. And if you look back at Galicia in Europe, there was an area called Galicia. Why was it called Galicia? Because Gauls were there. Gauls are Celts, another word for Celts, right? They migrated over to France, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Spain. And Spain, we have a Galicia too. Spanish culture comes down to Latin American culture. Now, there may have been ancient, Taino egg practices. I don't know, because I haven't researched Taino culture or, African American culture, or any of these cultures. I don't know them very deeply, right? But these practices, what I say is they all came from the same trunk. The branches are way out here, but the trunk is where they originated it. People had eggs from
All over.
when there's the beginning of humanity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
birds existed before people existed. There were things laying eggs before humans even existed.
And
So
there's the universal consciousnesses about it too. Like there's sort of these universal themes that we associate. Like you explained in your book, when you crack open an egg, it looks like the sun. And, that sort of archetypal imagery, it makes sense that no matter where you are in the world, when you crack open an egg, you look at it, you go, this looks like the sun, and have that association. And whether you take that association and say, well, the sun means growth and rebirth, so let me make this something about fertilization, or you say the sun is all about cleaning and freshness, so let me make it about cleansing. Regardless, those imageries and those archetypal thoughts are everywhere. And I think that it's just so amazing to see and feel that. Like, I really felt connected to your book in this sense. I really, really, really did.
So whether these archetypal ideas, these concepts, these ancient practices and concepts came from the same place literally, or there was a consciousness and a download, I would even say like a spiritual download, where
Yes.
someone on the other side of the world had the same download as someone on the other side of the world, and they realized that an egg can be used for a spiritual cleansing. To me, it doesn't matter. It just shows
Right.
that there's a truth in it. There's a truth
Yes.
in it, either because it came from the same place or because two people on opposite sides of the world had the same awakened revelation, which means it's a spirit-led thing. In my opinion, it's a spirit-led thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And there's even evidence of that. There's evidence of, they have, what was the, there was a science experiment that they did with monkeys, actually,
Yeah.
where they taught a group of monkeys how to use a specific tool. And then, but on the other side, where on the other side of the world, monkeys that they're not even related to, all of a sudden started using the sticks that they had around them in the same way, but there was no interaction, there was no teaching of that. And it just goes to show that there's some sort of web that's happening. Of this
Exactly. And that's where
web
we get
that we're
into
all,
spirit. Yeah, where we get
yes,
into the idea, the concept of spirit and the concept of interconnectedness. So this is not about, and I totally on 100% honor and respect closed traditions and like looking
right,
at something nobody wants their stuff disrespected or saying, hey, this is our practice when it's not. That is not okay. I mean, and from my personal perspective, we see that with Russia and Ukraine, right? Where Russia is claiming this author is a Russian author. No, they're a Ukrainian author. You just want to say they're a Russian author because it bolsters your self-concept, but that's not a truth, right? So
right,
nobody likes having their stuff stolen, but when we can see that there's stuff that is, there's overlap and commonality. Now there's a difference in the Olympia and in the Ukrainian egg cleanse. There's differences in it. It's a slightly different technique, but there's, like, I would say it's 90% similar and 10% different. So it's fascinating to see these ancient practices really being, we see the root of it, whether the root is coming from spirit or the root is coming from common ancestry. Who knows? It could be either one. And to me, it's fascinating either way.
It is. It's fascinating, and I also love like you said, the cultural differences and being able to respect the cultural differences, because at the end of the day, there are core truths. Whether we want to believe that or not, there are core truths that are what we would consider natural law, if you will, about the spirit across all boards, whether you want to believe it or not. But within those core truths, we get to play around with the tapestry of how those core truths get integrated into our differences, into our cultures, you know? And so we get to play with the idea of this same archetypal image of a water spirit, but this water spirit is very specific to this culture. She came to this culture for whatever reason, or this forest spirit came to this culture for whatever reason. And there's details about that spirit that only make sense to those people of that land, and I think that that is so beautiful, and it's so important to look at. We're when you kind of funnel it down, yeah, we're all human, but we're weaving those truths in our differences that make it so cool. Like, that web is super colorful, it's super exciting. And this book really, I think one of the things that, as I was reading it, I said to myself, I have a deeper appreciation of Slavic tradition. I have a deeper appreciation of the story of Baba Yaga as well. But I have an even more appreciation that it's like, it's almost as if the book is bringing forth this idea that we're in this together. And I think maybe it's because I'm emotional because of the Ukraine thing, and I also know what's happening in Puerto Rico, what's happening in Hawaii, what's happening in the islands as well. Let's be real, it's colonization, whether it's happening from the Russians or whether it's happening from America to the islands. It's
100%.
colonization, it's fucked up. And this book kind of got me in that space of like, we're in this together. You know what I mean? We're in this
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. I
And
think
I
it's,
appreciate you for that.
yeah, I think it's really, there's another important thing to bring up is that, and it sort of relates back to that, is that I'm in my Instagram, I'm very active on Instagram. That's my most active social. I post a lot of things about Ukraine, and I've had a couple of people, most people have been very, very supportive, but a couple of people, but what about this? But what about that? I'm like, yeah, we need to
All
address
of
those
it.
things too. It doesn't mean that these people being murdered, we should ignore them, because we need to address racism in the States. We
Right.
for sure need to,
Yes.
like, there's so much more that needs to be done in the States, and we need to work on that simultaneously. But that doesn't mean we'll forget those people. and we're only going to focus on this thing. I put things on LGBTQ. I put BIPOC. I put all kinds of stuff on my thing, on my feed all the time. It's not saying, oh, these people are the only important ones and forget everybody else. I think it's about humanity and this is something that I can educate people on because I'm knowledgeable about it. That's why I post about it all the time, because I know about it. I have friends over there. I have, ancestry in Ukraine. This is all my people. So of course I'm going to be more knowledgeable about it, but that doesn't mean I'm like going, but forget everybody else. That's not it. Right. So I think that's something that it's like, we can't get into the when we get into that whataboutism, then we have a slippery slope into all lives matter and all of that stuff, which I think is, we know that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't help anything, right?
It's the sad fact that we constantly have to have the caveat of, but it's about this right now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So when it was Black Lives Matter and everyone was like, all lives, no, but it's about Black lives right now. This is the conversation.
This is where the crisis is happening,
Ukraine,
right?
It's important about Ukraine, but what about all that? Yeah, but Ukraine, we have to focus right now because that's what's happening. And it's a sad caveat that we always have to put in. There should not have to be right now, this problem right now. These problems have been. These problems, sadly, will continue to be. So let's just spirit-led. I'm telling you, spirit-led, like you said, spirit-led, you will get this gold medal. You just have to pay attention to spirit. And God, we could talk about your book and its interrelation as well with everything that we're talking about forever. And I wanted to ask questions about like kind of like the folk magiciness of it all, the food and the decorating of the eggs and the puppet. Like I wanted to talk about all of it, but we're running out of time. And which means I'm probably gonna have to invite you back on the show at some later
point. Of course, anytime. I gotta say one more thing too, though, that's so fascinating. It's not just the magic, it's not just the spiritual practices. I've got rugs that are Ukrainian rugs. They're woven out of wool. If you look at these rugs, I wish I could turn my camera around and show you one in my living room. It looks like a Native American woven rug. It looks like a Central American or South American rug. It looks like these things. We see this showing up in arts and crafts where there's crossover, in spirituality where there's crossover. When we go back to the oldest stuff, that's where we start to see the more commonality than we see differences. It's when people start bringing in these newer religions like Christianity, Islam, these are new religions in the big scheme of humanity.
They muddy up the waters.
Exactly. That's when we start to see, oh, well, this is my practice and it's my way is the right way and your way is going to lead you to, your demise, right? That's like a new feature on the scale of humanity. And so like we find ancient art practices are more alike than they are different. Ancient spiritual practices are more alike than we're different. So if we go back, it's all the same tree trunk. We just have this branching off that's happening, and that's what we see. Yeah.
Madame Pamita, I adored having you on the show tonight, and just really quick, I'm having like a little ADD moment, but I actually saw some of the decor on the eggs and on the rugs, and some of the tapestries that are made on the machine. I forget what the name of the machine is called. Oh my God, the art is beautiful. And like I say to myself, like, first of all, it's an egg. How do you it's so tiny and it's so intricate and just it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. So I have to give kudos to that as a cultural artistic piece. But I know, since we don't have time to talk about all the other wonderful parts of your book, I know that you have some workshops coming up regarding some of the practices that are in your book. You want to talk about that?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, of course. So one of the things that I feel super passionate about, it's probably my number one passion, is teaching. I love to teach. Books are a way of teaching. You can transmit to many people through a book, but I also like teaching classes, and I have two podcasts that I teach through. I have one called Magic and the Law of Attraction, which is general magic, folk magic. I talk about all kinds of folk magic on there. And then I have a new one that's called Baba Yaga's Magic that I just focus on Slavic magic practices in that one, because again, underserved, not a lot of information out there. So there are no podcasts out there about it. So I said, well, that means I have to make one. So there's that. But I also love to teach like classes, and I used to travel before pandemic, I used to travel all over. But when the pandemic hit, I said, well, I'm just going to transfer that over to Zoom. So I teach Zoom classes. And the first Sunday of every month at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, I teach a class that's usually an hour and a half to 2 hours long, showing you and deepening a specific practice. So we have a bunch of them coming up, and they're the first Sunday of every month. There's a couple months that I'm missing. Like I think I'm missing, July, because it's the 4th of July weekend. So and that's also my birthday weekend. So I said, forget it. I'm going to take that one off. But we have, like in June, I'm going to be teaching about vinoki, which are the flower crowns, how to make those beautiful flower crowns that you see in Ukrainian costume, but they're spiritual. This is a spiritual practice. You can do divination with it. You can bring in protection, cleansing, all kinds of things with those. So we're going to talk about the herbs and so forth that are used in those and how to make those flower crowns. In August, I'm teaching about embroidery, the talismanic embroidery. Again, we see those symbols in the talismanic embroidery cross-culturally, but there's specific meanings in Ukrainian magic for that. September, doing the beeswax in water cleansing, the wax and water cleansing. October is about spinning magic with the spindle, spinning and weaving magic. In November, we're going to talk about living fire. And there's a special, oh my gosh, there's so much. That's another whole book in itself. Fire magic is amazing in Slavic practices. And we're going to talk about that. And then the last one, December, in the first Sunday of December, we're going to be talking about Slavic winter holiday, the winter holiday rituals, which are pre-Christian. And this aspect of the diduk, which is this sheaf of wheat that you bring into the house. It's a house for the ancestors. So ancestral magic everywhere you go.
Everywhere, yes. Ah!
So you can find those by going to witchcraftworkshops.com. I didn't tell them where to find it. Witchcraftworkshops.com will take you to the page on my site, parlourofwonders.com, which show you how to sign up. And you can sign up for any of those right now. They're all up and live. So they're available to you. Sign up and get a space and join me and make some magic with me.
Oh, I'm definitely going to, especially that flower wreath one I'm excited about for sure. You guys heard it here. So make sure you sign up. Make sure you pick up this book. It is so, so good for really reals. And one last question, just, for the audience here, we have Coles, we have Danny Love, Joey Rodriguez, a couple of new people. My husband Archie is here, a couple new people that came in during the live. So for the audience, if people, and especially, reconnecting Ukrainians and people of Slavic ancestry. Do you have any advice for them in terms of how to go about either reconnecting to their traditions or coming from it as an outsider to these traditions? Do you have any advice for them, and any part of the book that you would definitely reference for them?
Well, I think, a lot of people, I can jump in it a little bit because we talked about this before the show, about people wanting to connect with Baba Yaga and wanting to connect to that spirit and being called to connect to that spirit. People say, oh, I want to connect to Baba Yaga, or I want to be a devotee, or I want to connect to her spirit. And I say, that is fantastic. So, if you're having that urge, she's probably calling you, but be aware when you're stepping in that you're being called to work with the spirit with humility. I mean, I talk about that all the time. You come, she's really all about that. You come with humility, and you come with the sense of like honoring her, It doesn't matter if you have Slavic background or no Slavic background. You can come and, work with her and honor her, but be prepared because she's an initiator. She's going to test you. So she's going to give you challenges. So if you want to have like an easy, aspect to your life, she might not be the spirit to work with. If you want your life to be a feathered nest with like no challenges, she may not be the one. But if you're ready to get the Olympic gold and you want to go up there and get that gold medal, and you want that tough coach that's going to really work you so that you get that gold medal, then she's your gal. She's definitely your gal. So if you're going to work with her, be prepared that she's going to make you work. She's going to make you cry. You're going to be mad at her sometimes, but you have to come with honor and respect. She's, she's a spirit. She knows more than you do. And coming to do these practices, I invite you to come to these practices, honor that they're Slavic practices, that the Ukrainian practices or Slavic practices, but come and try them out. If you feel called to make pasanki, the decorated eggs, for example, or do the embroidered vishivanki, do those things, because if it like shines a light for you, and if it creates light within you, it's nothing but good.
Yes.
So learn about it from the book. There's lots of details. You can come into my classes and we can do it hands-on. You can have me there with you, answering all your questions. But explore this beautiful culture and explore this really sort of unique spiritual practice that really is, as much as it has in common with other spiritual practices, as aspects that are super unique. And those unique things give a little flavor, just like food, right? We all eat food. We all eat bread. But bread in Ukraine is different from bread in Puerto Rico. It's different from bread in Japan. It's different from bread in, Nigeria. They're all going to have a different form of bread, but we all have bread. Explore those different things, and have fun with them. So,
yes.
Yeah.
You guys, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this episode and every episode on Sundays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Madame Pamita, thank you so, so, so much for saying yes to me and honoring my show, for being on here tonight. And most importantly, you guys, this is how we grow. Have a wonderful Sunday. Bye.